Hello everyone, welcome to the Epic Flight Academy. My name is Mike Thompson and this is the Private Pilot Ground School course. Now remember, to be successful in this program, there are three key pieces. Number one, the online portion of the course. Number two, these videos parallel that course online. And number three, please be sure to consult with your flight instructor in a one-on-one ground session to make sure that you have a thorough understanding of all of this interesting yet slightly technical material. So what's our topic today? Today we're still talking about airspace. Now remember, in the Aeronautical Information Manual, Chapter 3, they talk about airspace and they divide it up into controlled, uncontrolled, and special use airspace. Well, today we want to talk about special use airspace. Well, what does that mean? What are the special uses? Well, let's talk about that. The first type of special use airspace is what we call an alert area. And that's exactly what it sounds like. When you fly in this area marked on your chart, it says to be alert. Alert for what? Well, alert areas are marked on a chart where there is a high volume of flight activity. And in particular, it's usually a high volume of flight training activity. So, as you probably have already discovered as you're flying with your flight instructor and you're doing S-turns across a road or a series of stalls or a slow flight and different things, you're changing altitudes, changing speeds, and there's areas of airspace near airports with flight schools where a lot of that activity takes place. So you might see marked on your chart an alert area. The second type of special use airspace that you'll see marked on your chart is what we call a MOA. Well, now that's not a Starbucks drink. I think you're thinking of a mocha. This is a MOA. This is an MOA, a military operations area. And again, pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Somewhere nearby are some military bases. And these military aircraft, they might be a heavy aircraft, fighter aircraft, a rotary aircraft, are conducting operations, usually training type operations. Now, the thing about the military operations area is you do not need permission from anyone to fly into and through a MOA. It's marked on your chart to give us pilots a heads up. Even though we don't need clearance to go in there, we need to be careful and especially vigilant for military aircraft operating, conducting, usually training operations. Okay, so that's two. Now, I'm looking in the AIM Chapter 3. What's another one? Another one is called the warning area. Warning areas start from 3 nautical miles off the coast and out. They're not really designated as to how far out they go. I mean, there's no exact mileage. They're designated on the chart. When you look on the chart, you'll see the limitations of the warning area, but there's no real dimension as to how far. They start at 3 nautical miles. And these warning areas may be over a country's territorial water, or they may be over international water. So when you fly into these warning areas, you're going to want to have communication with controlling agencies as you're inbound into the country. So for each of these 3 airspaces, alert, the MOA, and the warning area, I want you to take your sectional chart out and have a look with your flight instructor, and you can identify some of these. The next one we want to talk about is a restricted area. And again, exactly what it sounds like. These areas are restricted some of the time. They're not restricted all of the time. What's important to understand about restricted areas is there's a controlling agency, and it's trying to protect us pilots from potentially hazardous operations. Sometimes there might be artillery activity near some military training base, or as the case is here in Florida, we fly near Titusville. Well, Titusville is the home of NASA, and we continue to have rocket launches. That's kind of a cool thing to see if you live down here in Florida. And the restricted area around NASA is a good example. If we're not having rocket launches, that restricted area is what we call cold, and you're free to fly through there. If we are having rocket launches and the controlling agency activates that restricted area, it is restricted. Stay away, do not fly in there. So it's important that you work on this with your flight instructor and understand, how do I contact that controlling agency, and be crystal clear whether that restricted area is open, that's cold, or closed, that's hot. Hot or cold. Okay, controlled firing areas. Controlled firing areas, there is no clearance required, and again, these are typically military operations or some other type of firing operations, maybe flight test of some type, and we want to avoid those areas. Now, there's no clearance required, but we want to be very vigilant and cautious of those areas. There's a couple others that deal with wildlife refuges, and sanctuaries. Now, wildlife is regulated and overseen by other parts of the federal government than the FAA. So these are not technically FAA airspaces, but they are marked on the chart. Your flight instructor will show you these. And if it is a wildlife refuge area, it is requested that pilots maintain 2,000 feet AGL or higher. Now, if it is a wildlife sanctuary, that's a little bit different. Over a sanctuary, it's not a request, it's a requirement that we are 1,000 feet AGL or higher. A couple other special use airspaces you might see around the chart. Parachute jump areas, you can also find those in the chart supplement. Air Defense Identification Zones, or ADIZ, A-D-I-Z. These will be up and down the east and west coast, and also along the Gulf Coast of the U.S. So if you're going to fly through the ADIZ inbound to the United States, you must be on an IFR, a VFR, or a DVFR flight plan, and you must have two-way radio communication and a Mode C transponder. So, that's not all, folks. There is more special use airspace. Again, look at our online course, review this in the AIM Chapter 3. Another one is national security areas. National security areas are clearly marked on the chart by a thick magenta dashed line, and it's requested that pilots do not fly over a national security area. Prohibited areas are slightly different. A prohibited area, you are, and again, exactly what it sounds like, prohibited from flying over whatever is inside that prohibited area. Then we have airport advisory areas. And this is a flight service advisories to a non-towered airport within 10 nautical miles. And the frequency that's used here is the Common Traffic Advisory frequency. Also, Back to the military, we have military training routes. Remember earlier we talked about the MOA? Well, there's also transitory routes, cross-country routes, so the military can practice these operations. And these routes are explained in AIM Chapter 3. There are two types, VFR, military training routes, and IFR, military training routes. So there's a lot of different kinds of airspace, folks. Again, Chapter 3 of the AIM, controlled, uncontrolled, special use. Please review this with your flight instructor. Let's touch briefly on something called Special VFR. Now, when we talk about visual flight rules and instrument flight rules, these rules are determined in Part 91 based upon weather, particularly cloud ceilings and flight visibility. So sometimes we might be in what we call marginal VFR, and we start to get kind of sort of in between, and if I can maintain myself clear of the clouds with 1 mile of visibility, I can request what's called a special VFR. A special VFR, 1 statute mile of visibility, clear of clouds, can be requested in Bravo, Charlie, and Delta airspace. Remember, if you're a VFR pilot, you can only get a special VFR during the daytime. Now, can I get a special VFR at nighttime? Yes, but now I must be instrument rated. Okay, and let's wrap up this short session with something we call a TIRSA. Now, a TIRSA is kind of interesting. It's kind of a cross between old airspace that we had prior to the ABC system, and it sort of ties in with current airspace. It looks a little bit like a Class Charlie. Remember our tuna cans stacked up. So what exactly is a TIRSA? It is a terminal radar service area, a TIRSA. And it is built around a Class Delta airport. And the three-dimensional airspace, and you can see it in this diagram right here, you can see what it looks like on your sectional chart, and you can see what it looks like in 3D. On this sectional chart, they are gray solid lines around that Class D airport. Here's the difference between the TIRSA and the Charlie. In a Charlie, we know already we're required to have ATC 2-way radio communication. And in a TIRSA, you're not required. That communication is voluntary. Makes good sense to me, of course, but it's still voluntary. Now, as you fly through the TIRSA toward the Delta, of course we cannot go into the Delta without talking to the controlling tower. But outside the Delta, participation in that TIRSA is voluntary. Well, folks, I know that's a lot of material. Again, be sure to review it online, look in the AIM, and talk to your flight instructor. Well, that's it for Special Use Airspace. See you next time.